Picture this. A 9-year-old boy sits across from a child psychologist just weeks after his sister's brutal murder. When asked how he feels about the violent death that occurred steps from his bedroom, he calmly states he still feels safe in the house where it happened. When asked if he misses his murdered sister, he simply shrugs and says, "I'm fine." Then comes the most chilling moment of all. When asked to draw his family, he completely erases his dead sister from existence, as if she never lived at all. This isn't fiction. This is Burke Ramsey, and what you're about to discover about his role in America's most notorious unsolved murder will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the JonBenét Ramsey case. If you're ready to uncover secrets that have been buried for nearly 3 decades, make sure you're subscribed because this story gets darker than you can imagine. What did Burke really see that night? What did he do? And why has his family spent 28 years protecting a truth so devastating it could destroy them all? Let's find out. On January 8, 1997, just 13 days after 6-year-old JonBenét Ramsey was found murdered in her family's basement, her 9-year-old brother Burke sat in a child-friendly room at the Children's Advocacy Center in Boulder, Colorado. Dr. Susan Bernhard, a respected child psychologist, had been brought in to conduct what should have been a routine interview with a traumatized young witness. What happened in that room still haunts investigators today. The session was carefully designed to put Burke at ease. There were toys scattered around, soft lighting, no intimidating police officers, just a gentle doctor trying to help a grieving child process an unimaginable tragedy. But from the moment Burke walked in, something felt wrong. Dr. Bernhard began with simple questions about how Burke was feeling. Any normal child who had just lost a sibling to a violent murder would be expected to show fear, sadness, or at minimum some level of distress. Children who experience trauma this close to home typically cling to their parents, have nightmares, or express terror about their safety. Burke's response chilled everyone in the room. "I still feel safe in the house," he said matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. This was the same house where his sister had been sexually assaulted, strangled with a garrote, and left to die in the basement. The same house where an alleged intruder had supposedly spent hours torturing and killing a child while the family slept upstairs. But Burke felt perfectly safe there. Dr. Bernhard pressed gently. "Do you miss JonBenét?" Burke's response was emotionally flat. "I'm fine." Not, "Yes, I miss her terribly." Not, "I can't believe she's gone." Just, "I'm fine," delivered with the same emotional weight someone might use to decline a second helping of dessert. When asked how he was coping with his sister's death, Burke explained that he dealt with it by playing Nintendo. While other children his age might have been unable to eat, sleep, or function normally after such a trauma, Burke had found solace in video games. The psychological evaluation took a darker turn when Dr. Bernhard asked Burke to draw a picture of his family. This is a standard technique child psychologists use to understand a child's emotional state and family relationships. The results can reveal feelings of displacement, fear, anger, or loss that children can't yet verbalize. What Burke drew defied all expectations. In his family portrait, JonBenét was completely absent. Not depicted as an angel, not shown as a memory, not included in any way. She had been erased from his family as completely as if she had never existed. Even more telling, he drew his father, John, far off to the side of the paper, physically separated from the rest of the family. His mother, Patsy, appeared as the smallest figure in the drawing. Child psychologists often interpret such symbolic omissions as windows into a child's inner emotional world. The placement of family members, their relative sizes, and who gets included or excluded can reveal unresolved tensions, feelings of abandonment, or emotional distance that the child cannot express in words. But the most disturbing moment was yet to come. When Dr. Bernhard began asking questions about inappropriate physical contact, standard questions in cases involving child victims, Burke's entire demeanor shifted. The calm, eerily composed child suddenly became visibly anxious. He placed a toy on his head, began fidgeting, and his voice changed when he said something that made everyone in the room freeze. "I have a secret." Dr. Bernhard leaned forward. "What kind of secret, Burke?" But that was all he would say. Despite gentle prodding and encouragement, Burke refused to share what this secret was. His evasiveness and obvious discomfort suggested something profound and troubling lay beneath the surface, something he had been told never to tell anyone. The interview notes, later compiled in the controversial Oneida Papers, described Burke's overall presentation as showing emotional disconnection and unusual composure, given the circumstances. Where trauma typically produces recognizable symptoms in children, nightmares, regression, clinging behavior, emotional outbursts, Burke showed none of these normal responses. Instead, he presented as a child who seemed untouched by the horror that had unfolded just steps from his bedroom. But was this the innocence of childhood, the protective shield of psychological trauma, or something far more sinister? The answer would remain hidden for nearly 2 decades, until Burke himself would provide new clues that would change everything investigators thought they knew about that terrible night. What we do know is that 3 different psychological experts who examined Burke's behavior that day came to the same conclusion. This was not how an innocent, traumatized child typically responds to losing a sibling to murder. Something was very, very wrong. And if you think Burke's childhood behavior was disturbing, wait until you see how he acted as an adult when directly asked if he killed his sister. That interview, and what body language experts discovered, will shock you. But first, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because this story is about to take some turns you won't see coming. September 2016. Nearly 20 years after JonBenét's murder, Burke Ramsey, now 29 years old, agreed to break his decades of silence. The CBS network was preparing to air a documentary that would directly accuse him of killing his sister. Burke's legal team advised him to get ahead of the story by sitting down with Dr. Phil McGraw for what would become one of the most analyzed interviews in true crime history. What happened during those 3 episodes would reignite the entire case and give behavioral experts new evidence that Burke was hiding something monumental. From the moment Burke walked onto Dr. Phil's set, something felt off. This wasn't the nervous energy you'd expect from someone defending themselves against murder accusations. This was something else entirely. Burke's appearance was striking, a thin, pale man with an almost childlike demeanor despite being nearly 30. He sat rigidly in his chair, his hands carefully positioned, his expression oddly blank. But it was what happened when Dr. Phil began asking questions that made viewers around the world lean forward in their seats. When Dr. Phil asked Burke to recall the last time he saw JonBenét alive, Burke began his answer with a phrase that immediately caught the attention of statement analysis experts. I want to say. Mark McClish, one of the country's leading experts in detecting deception through language, has identified phrases like, I want to say, as potential red flags. When someone begins a factual recollection with tentative language like this, it can indicate hesitation, memory issues, or, more troubling, an unconscious desire to obscure information. Why would Burke need to hedge when recalling the last time he saw his murdered sister? Either he remembered or he didn't. The uncertain language suggested his memories of that night might not be as clear-cut as he wanted people to believe. But then Dr. Phil asked the question that would define the entire interview. Did you kill JonBenét? The natural response for any innocent person would be immediate, firm, and unambiguous. No. Absolutely not. Of course not. Never. Something definitive and emotionally resolute. That's not what Burke said. Instead, he deflected. Look at the evidence, or the lack of it. Statement analysts like McClish noted that innocent individuals typically respond to direct accusations with direct denials. Burke's choice to pivot away from a personal denial to a broader commentary about evidence struck experts as intellectually evasive rather than emotionally authentic. Why not just say, no, I didn't kill my sister? But it wasn't just Burke's words that disturbed viewers. It was his behavior throughout the entire interview. He smiled. Constantly. Inappropriately. When discussing his sister's brutal murder, Burke would break into nervous grins that seemed completely disconnected from the gravity of the conversation. When Dr. Phil mentioned the sexual assault aspects of the crime, Burke smiled. When discussing the strangulation, he smiled. When talking about finding JonBenét's body in the basement, he smiled. These weren't brief, uncomfortable smiles that might indicate nervousness. These were sustained, broad grins that made viewers at home deeply uncomfortable. Social media exploded with comments about Burke's creepy expressions and disturbing reactions. Behavioral expert David Thompson, writing in a detailed LinkedIn analysis, cautioned against rushing to judgment. Thompson pointed out that Burke was a software engineer who worked from home, a naturally reclusive individual who might simply lack the social conditioning needed to handle intense public scrutiny appropriately. Thompson drew parallels to Brendan Dassey from the Netflix series, Making a Murderer, emphasizing that behavioral quirks in introverted individuals are often misread when viewed through the lens of suspicion. Sometimes social awkwardness is just social awkwardness. But other experts disagreed. Dr. Phil himself seemed taken aback by Burke's demeanor during the interview. The veteran television host, who has interviewed thousands of people in crisis situations, appeared visibly uncomfortable with Burke's responses and body language. The interview revealed other troubling inconsistencies. When Burke described hearing voices downstairs on the night JonBenét died, something he had never mentioned in previous statements to police, Dr. Phil pressed him for details. Burke became evasive again, claiming he couldn't remember exactly what he heard or when he heard it. For someone who had maintained for 20 years that he slept through the entire night, this new revelation about voices was significant. Why was he mentioning it now? And why couldn't he provide any specifics? Perhaps most unsettling was Burke's overall emotional presentation. Throughout 3 hours of television focused on his murdered sister, Burke never once showed genuine sadness, anger, or grief. He spoke about JonBenét the way someone might discuss a distant acquaintance rather than a beloved sister whose life was brutally cut short. When Dr. Phil asked if he missed JonBenét, Burke's response was clinical. "Yeah, I mean, she was my little sister." No emotion, no elaboration, no sense of profound loss. Just a matter-of-fact acknowledgement that she had existed and now didn't. The interview sparked intense debate among experts and viewers alike. Some saw Burke's behavior as clear evidence of guilt, the nervous laughter of someone hiding a terrible secret. Others viewed it as the natural awkwardness of an introverted man thrust into an impossible situation. But everyone agreed on one thing: Burke Ramsey was not behaving like a typical innocent person defending himself against murder accusations. The CBS documentary that aired after Burke's Dr. Phil appearance would present a theory so shocking, so detailed, and so convincing that Burke would file a lawsuit seeking millions in damages. The documentary team claimed they had solved the JonBenét Ramsey case, and Burke was at the center of their solution. What they revealed about Burke's behavior before the murder was even more disturbing than his interviews afterward. If you think you've heard the worst of it, you haven't. But before we dive into the really dark stuff, smash that subscribe button if you want to see how this story ends, because what comes next will make you question everything you thought you knew about this family. To understand what may have happened on the night of December 26, 1996, we need to examine the troubling pattern of behavior Burke Ramsey displayed in the months and years leading up to his sister's death. What emerges is a portrait of a deeply disturbed child whose actions were crying out for help that never came. The most disturbing reports came from Linda Hoffman-Pugh, the Ramsey family's housekeeper, who had intimate access to the family's private life. What she witnessed in the Ramsey household painted a picture of sibling dynamics that were far from normal. According to multiple sources, including testimony Linda gave to investigators, Burke had a deeply troubling habit. He would repeatedly smear feces on JonBenét's belongings. This wasn't a one-time incident or typical childhood experimentation. It was a pattern of behavior that continued over time. Burke would spread his feces on JonBenét's bedroom walls. He would put it in her bed, on her personal items, in places where she would inevitably encounter it. The psychological implications of this behavior cannot be overstated. In child psychology, scatological behaviors, particularly when directed at a specific person, are considered significant red flags. Children who engage in deliberate feces smearing, especially targeting a sibling's personal space, are often expressing deep-seated anger, jealousy, or psychological distress in the only way they know how. But Burke's concerning behavior didn't stop there. There was also a reported incident where Burke struck JonBenét with a golf club, allegedly leaving a visible scar on her face. While sibling conflicts are normal, using weapons, even improvised ones like golf clubs, crosses into dangerous territory. Dr. Werner Spitz, a renowned forensic pathologist who publicly commented on the Ramsey case, interpreted these behaviors as possible manifestations of severe sibling rivalry, jealousy, and frustration. The dynamics in the Ramsey household, Dr. Spitz suggested, may have intensified these feelings. JonBenét was the star of the family. At just 6 years old, she was already a veteran of beauty pageants, winning contest after contest. Her bedroom was filled with crowns, trophies, and ribbons. Professional photographers regularly came to the house for glamour shoots. JonBenét appeared in magazines and local television shows. Meanwhile, Burke lived in her shadow. He was a quiet, awkward child who showed little interest in the spotlight that surrounded his sister. While JonBenét was being pampered, dressed up, and celebrated, Burke was largely ignored. The attention disparity in the household was stark. Patsy Ramsey's world revolved around JonBenét's pageant career. John Ramsey was often absent due to business travel. Burke was left to navigate his childhood largely alone, watching his little sister receive the love, attention, and admiration he likely craved. This family dynamic created a perfect storm for resentment to build. Child psychiatrists who have studied the case note that the feces-smearing behavior is particularly significant because it represents a form of territorial marking. Burke was symbolically claiming JonBenét's space while simultaneously degrading it. This suggests feelings of jealousy, so intense they manifested in aggressive, antisocial behavior. Even more concerning, there were reports that Burke had engaged in what some experts term playing doctor with JonBenét, inappropriate sexual exploration that went beyond normal childhood curiosity. While these reports were never officially confirmed, they added another layer of dysfunction to an already troubled household. The question that haunted investigators was obvious. If Burke was capable of such disturbing behavior before the murder, what might he have been capable of on the night JonBenét died? Linda Hoffman-Pugh later told investigators that she was so concerned about Burke's behavior toward JonBenét that she had actually confiscated one of his Boy Scout knives. She found it so troubling that Burke had access to sharp objects given his apparent obsession with his sister. She hid the knife in a small cupboard just outside JonBenét's bedroom door, thinking this would keep it safely away from Burke. The irony is devastating. That knife's location would later become crucial evidence in theories about what happened that night. But perhaps the most telling detail about Burke's pre-murder behavior was how the family handled it. Instead of seeking professional help for a child who was clearly struggling, instead of addressing the obvious psychological issues, the Ramseys simply tried to manage Burke's behavior internally. Patsy would dismiss the feces incidents. John seemed largely unaware of the extent of Burke's problems. No therapists were consulted. No interventions were attempted. The family's approach seemed to be hoping Burke would eventually grow out of these disturbing behaviors. This pattern of denial and minimization would later extend to how the family handled the murder investigation. Just as they had ignored clear warning signs about Burke's psychological state, they would ignore evidence that pointed to his involvement in JonBenét's death. The Ramsey family had become experts at protecting Burke from consequences, a skill they would need more than ever on the morning of December 26, 1996. What happened that Christmas night would test every limit of a family's ability to protect their son. And the lengths they would go to keep Burke's secrets would shock even seasoned investigators. But first, we need to understand exactly what transpired in those crucial hours between Christmas dinner and dawn. The timeline investigators pieced together reveals a series of events so disturbing, so calculated, that it reads like a psychological thriller. Except this nightmare was real, and a 6-year-old girl paid the ultimate price. Stay with me, because we're about to enter the darkest night in the Ramsey family's history, and what you'll discover will change how you see this case forever. Make sure you're subscribed, because this is where the story gets truly unbelievable. Christmas night 1996 began like any other holiday evening in the Ramsey household. The family had spent Christmas Day at the home of Fleet and Priscilla White, close family friends who lived nearby in Boulder, Colorado. JonBenét, still buzzing with excitement from her Christmas presents, was tired but happy. Burke had received new toys and seemed content. John and Patsy were preparing for an early morning flight to Michigan to spend the second half of their Christmas vacation at their summer home. What happened in the next 8 hours would destroy this family forever. The Ramseys returned home around 9 p.m. According to their official statements, both children were exhausted. JonBenét had fallen asleep in the car, and John carried her upstairs to her bedroom, where Patsy helped change her into pajamas without fully waking her. Burke, they claimed, went straight to his room and fell asleep quickly. John and Patsy said they spent the next hour packing for their early morning flight and then went to bed themselves around 10 p.m. By their account, the house was peaceful and quiet, a normal end to a perfect Christmas day. But investigators would later discover this official timeline was riddled with lies. The first crack in their story came from the pineapple. When JonBenét's autopsy was performed, the coroner found fresh pineapple in her small intestine, pineapple that was still being digested at the time of her death. Based on the digestive timeline, JonBenét had eaten this pineapple within 1 to 2 hours of her murder. But according to the Ramseys, JonBenét went straight to bed and never woke up. She never went downstairs, never had a snack, never ate anything after returning from the Christmas party. So how did fresh pineapple end up in her system? Crime scene photographs revealed the answer. Sitting on the Ramseys' dining room table was a bowl of cut pineapple with a spoon in it. When investigators tested this bowl for fingerprints, they found Burke's prints on the bowl and Patsy's prints on the spoon. This physical evidence completely contradicted the family's official story. Someone had been downstairs with JonBenét after they returned home. Someone had prepared pineapple as a late-night snack. And Burke's fingerprints proved he was involved. The pineapple wasn't the only evidence that shattered the Ramseys' timeline. Enhanced audio analysis of the 911 call Patsy made to report finding the ransom note revealed something shocking. While Patsy claimed Burke was asleep upstairs during the call, audio experts detected what sounded like a child's voice in the background of the recording. The voice appeared to say, "What did you find?" followed by what sounded like John's voice saying, "We're not speaking to you," in an angry tone. If this analysis was accurate, it meant Burke was awake and aware of what was happening during the 911 call, directly contradicting the family's claim that he slept through the entire ordeal. But the most damning evidence was yet to be discovered. At approximately 1 p.m. on December 26th, more than 6 hours after the ransom note was found, John Ramsey went down to the basement with family friend Fleet White to search areas of the house that police had not yet thoroughly examined. In a small storage room called the wine cellar, John made a discovery that would haunt him forever: JonBenét's lifeless body. The 6-year-old was found lying on her back, covered by a white blanket. Her arms were raised above her head, secured with white cord that was tied to a wooden stick, later identified as a broken paintbrush from Patsy's art supplies. The makeshift garrote was still around her neck. John's reaction to finding his daughter was immediate and, according to investigators, potentially contaminated the crime scene. He picked up JonBenét's body, carried her upstairs, and laid her on the living room floor, destroying crucial forensic evidence in the process. The autopsy would later reveal the full horror of what had been done to JonBenét. She had suffered a devastating skull fracture, a blow so severe it created an 8.5-inch crack in her skull and caused massive brain bleeding. She had also been sexually assaulted with the broken paintbrush handle. Finally, she had been strangled with the cord garrote. The coroner determined that JonBenét had died from strangulation, but the head injury alone would have been fatal. The question that would plague investigators was the order of these injuries and who could have inflicted them. What made this crime scene so bizarre was the staging. The ransom note was clearly fake. It was written on Patsy's notepad with Patsy's pen, using phrases and amounts that pointed directly back to the family. The demand was for exactly $118,000, the same amount as John's recent Christmas bonus. The note itself was unusually long for a ransom demand, 2.5 pages of rambling text that seemed designed more to misdirect investigators than to communicate with kidnappers. Handwriting experts would later determine that Patsy could not be ruled out as the author. But perhaps most telling was what investigators found in Burke's bedroom that morning. While his parents claimed he was sleeping soundly, officers noted that his bed didn't look slept in. The covers were neat, the pillow barely indented. For a child who supposedly slept through a home invasion, kidnapping, and murder, Burke's bedroom looked suspiciously undisturbed. When Burke was finally interviewed that morning, hours after the body was found, his demeanor struck investigators as odd. While his parents were overwhelmed with grief, Burke seemed eerily calm. He asked few questions about his sister, showed little emotion, and seemed more interested in his video games than the tragedy unfolding around him. Detective Linda Arndt, who was present during those first crucial hours, later said she felt something was very wrong with the family's reactions and story. The crime scene, the ransom note, the family's behavior, none of it added up to a stranger abduction gone wrong. Instead, it looked like an elaborate cover-up designed to protect someone in that house. But who were they protecting? And what really happened during those lost hours between Christmas dinner and dawn? The answer may lie in a piece of evidence so obvious that investigators initially overlooked its significance. A flashlight, sitting in plain sight on the Ramseys' kitchen counter, completely wiped clean of fingerprints. This flashlight would become the key to understanding not just how JonBenét died, but who killed her, and why her family has spent 28 years protecting that person's identity. What investigators discovered about this flashlight will shock you, but before we reveal that evidence, make sure you're subscribed because this case is about to take a turn that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about that night. Of all the evidence found in the Ramsey house that December morning, one item stood out for its suspicious placement and condition: a black Maglite flashlight sitting upright on the kitchen counter, positioned almost like it was meant to be seen. What made this flashlight extraordinary wasn't just where it was found, it was what wasn't on it. No fingerprints. Not a single one. Not only was the exterior of the flashlight completely clean, but when investigators opened it, they discovered that even the batteries inside had been wiped clean of prints. This level of evidence elimination suggested someone had very deliberately removed all traces of who had handled this object. For experienced investigators, finding a household item with 0 fingerprints is like finding a smoking gun. People don't typically clean their flashlights so thoroughly unless they're trying to hide something. And the fact that both the flashlight and the batteries were spotless indicated this wasn't casual cleaning. This was deliberate evidence tampering. The flashlight's position was equally suspicious. Instead of being stored in a drawer, closet, or other normal location, it sat prominently on the kitchen counter in an upright position. Crime scene photographs show it standing conspicuously among the normal clutter of a busy kitchen, almost as if it had been placed there intentionally to be discovered. This prominent placement raised immediate questions. Was the flashlight being presented as evidence? Was someone trying to direct investigators' attention to it? Or was it staged there to mislead the investigation? When investigators questioned John and Patsy Ramsey about the flashlight, their responses were inconsistent and troubling. Initially, both parents seemed to recognize the flashlight. Patsy vaguely recalled it as possibly being a gift from John's son, John Andrew, perhaps for use in his plane or for other purposes. John acknowledged owning a similar Maglite flashlight and said it was typically stored in a drawer near the bar area. But their story quickly changed. In later interviews, both John and Patsy claimed the flashlight didn't belong to them at all. They suggested it might have been brought into their home by an intruder. This dramatic shift from recognition to denial raised immediate red flags with investigators. Adding to the mystery, when police checked the drawer where John said their flashlight was normally kept, they found it empty. The drawer was open, suggesting someone had recently removed something from it. If the flashlight on the counter wasn't theirs, where was their actual flashlight? The Ramseys' changing story about the flashlight became even more suspicious when viewed against the physical evidence. John claimed their flashlight typically didn't work because of dead batteries. But the flashlight found on the counter had working batteries that had been wiped as clean as the flashlight itself. Why would someone take the time to clean batteries unless they were trying to remove fingerprint evidence? And why would John lie about his flashlight not working when investigators could easily test the batteries? The flashlight's significance became clear when forensic experts examined JonBenét's injuries. The devastating skull fracture that caused her death was consistent with being struck by a heavy, cylindrical object, exactly like a large Maglite flashlight. To test this theory, the CBS documentary team conducted an experiment using a flashlight identical to the one found in the Ramsey kitchen. When they struck a model skull with the same force a 9-year-old could generate, the results were devastating. The impact created fracture patterns nearly identical to those found on JonBenét's skull. This experiment proved that a child Burke's age and size could have inflicted the fatal head wound using the flashlight. The weapon was heavy enough to cause massive damage, but light enough for a 9-year-old to swing with deadly force. But if Burke had used the flashlight to strike his sister, why was it wiped clean and placed on the kitchen counter? A 9-year-old in a panic wouldn't have the presence of mind to eliminate fingerprint evidence and stage the weapon's placement. This suggested adult involvement in the cover-up. The flashlight evidence pointed to a chilling scenario. Burke may have struck JonBenét in a moment of anger or frustration, but an adult, likely John Ramsey, had cleaned up the evidence and staged the scene to protect his son. The positioning of the flashlight on the kitchen counter served multiple purposes. It was conspicuous enough to be found by investigators, potentially establishing it as the murder weapon. But because it was wiped clean, it couldn't be traced back to anyone in the family. Some investigators theorized the flashlight was meant to be a red herring, a false clue designed to make investigators think an intruder had used it and then carelessly left it behind. The problem with this theory was that real intruders don't typically clean their weapons of fingerprints and then display them prominently at crime scenes. The flashlight mystery deepened when investigators realized it connected to other pieces of evidence. The ransom note, like the flashlight, bore no fingerprints despite being written on paper that should have retained prints from whoever handled it. Both the flashlight and the ransom note showed the same pattern, evidence that had been deliberately cleaned or prepared to avoid detection, then staged to misdirect the investigation. This wasn't the work of a panicked child. This was the work of an adult with the presence of mind to eliminate evidence and construct an elaborate cover-up story. But the flashlight wasn't the only weapon investigators found in the Ramsey house that night. Hidden in a cabinet near JonBenét's room was a knife that belonged to Burke and that he had admitted to using for a very specific and disturbing purpose. What investigators discovered about this knife and Burke's connection to it would provide another crucial piece of the puzzle. The knife evidence, combined with the flashlight, would paint a picture of a crime scene that had been carefully managed to protect someone. But who was doing the protecting? And why were they so determined to keep Burke's secrets hidden? The answer involves a level of family deception so profound that it took investigators years to uncover the truth. If you want to see how deep this conspiracy goes, make sure you're subscribed, because what we're about to reveal about Burke's knives will show you just how calculated this cover-up really was. While investigators focused on the wiped-clean flashlight, another weapon lay hidden in the Ramsey house, one that would prove even more significant to understanding what happened that night. This weapon had been deliberately concealed, and Burke's connection to it would expose a crucial skill that directly linked him to JonBenét's murder. Just outside JonBenét's bedroom door, tucked away in a small cupboard, was a red Swiss Army knife engraved with Burke's name. This wasn't just any childhood possession. According to housekeeper Linda Hoffman-Pugh, she had confiscated this knife from Burke and hidden it there after Thanksgiving because of his obsessive behavior with it. Burke had been using this knife constantly, whittling, cutting, practicing knots. The housekeeper grew concerned watching him manipulate the blade with such precision and focus. She described how he would spend hours tying and untying complex knots, using the knife to perfect his technique. When police discovered this knife during their search, they found something that made their blood run cold. Fresh carpet fibers were embedded in the blade, fibers that matched the carpet in the room where JonBenét's body was found. But here's where the story becomes even more chilling. Burke had been a Cub Scout, actively learning advanced knot-tying techniques. The ligature around JonBenét's neck wasn't just any rope tied in panic. It was a sophisticated garrote, requiring knowledge of specific knots and precise tension control. During Burke's police interview, when asked about his knife skills, his demeanor shifted noticeably. He became evasive, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "I used it for making things," he mumbled, unable to make eye contact. The interviewer pressed further. "What kind of things, Burke?" "Just Boy Scout stuff. Knots and things." The forensic evidence was damning. The knots found on JonBenét required a level of dexterity and knowledge that eliminated most adults from suspicion. These weren't desperate, clumsy attempts at restraint. They were methodical, practiced, almost surgical in their precision. Linda Hoffman-Pugh would later testify that Burke's obsession with that knife had deeply unsettled her. He would sit for hours just cutting and tying, cutting and tying. It wasn't normal play. There was something intense about it, something that made me uncomfortable. But perhaps the most disturbing revelation came from Burke's scout leader, who confirmed that Burke had recently mastered the exact type of slip knot found around JonBenét's throat. This wasn't coincidence. This was skill, practiced and perfected. The knife's location was equally telling. Hidden just steps from JonBenét's room, easily accessible to someone who knew exactly where to find it. Someone who had hidden it there before, someone who considered it his secret weapon. If you're finding these connections as disturbing as we are, make sure you're subscribed, because what we uncover next about that infamous bowl of pineapple will shake you to your core. As investigators pieced together Burke's knife skills and the sophisticated nature of the murder weapon, they realized they weren't dealing with a random act of violence. This was someone who had the tools, the knowledge, and the opportunity. Someone who had been preparing, consciously or not, for exactly this kind of violence. Of all the evidence in the JonBenét Ramsey case, one seemingly innocent detail would prove to be the smoking gun that unraveled the family's entire story. A simple bowl of pineapple sitting on the kitchen counter would expose the lies, reveal the timeline, and point directly to the killer. The autopsy revealed that JonBenét had eaten fresh pineapple shortly before her death, within 2 hours of her murder. This single fact would destroy every alibi the Ramsey family had constructed and expose the truth they desperately tried to hide. John and Patsy Ramsey repeatedly insisted that JonBenét had fallen asleep in the car on the way home from the Christmas party and was carried directly to bed. They claimed she never woke up, never ate anything, and never left her room. But the pineapple in her digestive system told a different story entirely. When police photographed the crime scene, they found a bowl of fresh pineapple on the kitchen table, along with a large spoon and a glass of milk. The bowl contained the exact same type of pineapple found in JonBenét's stomach, fresh chunks, not canned, prepared in the distinctive way the Ramsey family preferred it.